Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the Dogman. I've already done a couple shows about the Dogman, and I wanted to give the title a differentiation from a different show, and so I called it Dogman Again. Sounds better than Dogman 2 because I don't remember exactly how many shows I've done on the Dogman. I've had Linda Godfrey on the show a couple of times. I've had a few other guests on. So instead of trying to figure out how many times I've done it, I'll just call it Dogman Again. Tonight's show was requested by Katrini Mackey. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I've talked about the Dogman, and, well, here we go again. Those folks that have had Dogman encounters describe mostly the same thing. A man-sized, hairy beast with the head of a dog. They say the legs look like a dog's legs, with the hock about 12 to 16 inches off the ground. The hock is what most people call the knee, but it's actually the ankle. A dog walks on its toes. The ankle is up off the ground and gives that backwards knee look. This is called the hock. People encountering Dogman almost always feel an overwhelming sense of dread. No one sees a Dogman and wants to get any closer. People encountering a Bigfoot sometimes get a feeling of fear. Most are just amazed at seeing a huge hair-covered man-like creature. Fear and unease are common, but Dogman is associated with impending destruction. A friend of mine, Joe Rogerio, was driving back from Corpus one night when he had an encounter. This occurred at about 4 in the morning in 2007, and he was on Highway 59 between Freer and Laredo. He was going about 60 miles an hour, passing up an area of land that had been plowed up previously. Off the road, across the fence, 2 deer were feeding about 10 feet away from the fence. Near them, he saw a humanoid figure, rather large, standing upright, with its arms down by its side, facing the 2 deer. The deer didn't seem to have any idea that this thing was there. Joe passed the creature and stopped to turn around. He wanted another look. This creature had looked like Bigfoot standing on the other side of the fence. A barbed wire fence is from 4 to 4.5 feet high, depending on who puts it up. This would have made the creature about 7 feet tall. Joe thought he had just imagined the beast in the dark, but he wanted another look. Being a paranormal investigator, Joe had an overactive curiosity gland. I know there's no such thing, but there should be. He turned his truck around and headed back. Joe was heading east once more at about 10 miles an hour, scanning the side of the road. As he was getting close to where he'd seen the creature, he was overcome by a feeling of dread. It was all he could do to keep the truck under control. He passed the spot where it had been without seeing his quarry. Now Joe was going the wrong direction. He stopped once more and turned around, and now facing home. Faced with having to go back and maybe have that horrible feeling once more, Joe was not looking forward to that short drive. What if the thing jumped onto, or worse, into his truck? The windows were open to the dark night. He got going at a full head of steam. Well, if he'd been driving a steam-powered truck. Joe sped by the creature's last known location as fast as he could. Once he felt as if he was a safe distance away, Joe dropped back down to normal speed and headed on home. He told me about his encounter, and I wrote it up in the book, The Laredo Paranormal Research Society. Last year, I was on Beyond Reality Radio with J.V. Johnson and Jason Hawes. Jason wasn't on that night, so I got to talk to J.V. When I told Joe's story, J.V. said this encounter sounded more like a Dogman encounter than a Bigfoot sighting. The abject fear and overwhelming feeling of dread was something seldom found in Bigfoot sightings, but it went along with dogmen all the time. It wasn't until I told J.V. Johnson that I got to thinking about this might have been what Joe had encountered. In the dark, when you're unsure what you're seeing, a Bigfoot or a Dogman would look very much alike. I mentioned this to Joe, and he thought about it, but I don't know if he ever made up his mind one way or the other. Linda Godfrey has said the same when trying to decide, is this one or the other? One thing that seems to go along with Dogman is the location. A lot of Dogman sightings are in the vicinity of Indian mounds. As far as I know, we don't have any Indian mounds here in Texas, but a lot of land has been rearranged over the years. Who knows what might have been here hundreds of years ago? There's an Indian legend that goes along with the Dogman. It's about Manabozho and his brother Mokeo. The Algonquin and Ojibwe also called him the Great Rabbit Trickster God. Manabozho had finished his mission. Akisha Manidos had sent him down to earth. Instead of returning, he went far away and built his wigwam on the northeast shore of a huge lake. Manidos felt sorry for Manabozho, since he was now all alone on the earth. To alleviate Manabozho's loneliness, Manidos sent down his twin brother Mokeo to be his companion. His twin brother could assume the shape of a wolf while hunting. There was also another Manidos that lived underground. Now, this one was nothing like the kind Manidos in the sky. Manabozho was aware of the anger of the bad Manidos and warned his brother, never cross the water when you're returning home. Follow the trail around the edge instead. One winter day, after Mokeo had been hunting for many hours, he found himself directly opposite his wigwam. Being tired and not wanting to walk all the way back, he decided he was just going to cross the frozen lake. When he was halfway across the lake, the ice broke. Mokeo, in his guise as the wolf, was seized by the bad Manidos and destroyed. Manabozho immediately knew what had happened to his brother. This caused him to mourn for many days. Every time Manabozho sighed, the earth trembled, which caused the hills and the ridges to form over the surface. Then the spirit of Mokeo, the wolf, appeared before Manabozho. Knowing that his brother could not be restored to life, Manabozho told him to follow the path of the setting sun and become the chief of the spirits in the hereafter, where all would someday meet. Manabozho then secreted himself in a large rock near Mackinac. This story coincides with reports of people who have seen a wolf-like creature following the trails that pass around the lake. The Dogman isn't considered to be an evil spirit, but you don't want to mess around if you see one. Another Native American encounter, or connection, to the Dogman was recently discovered by Linda Godfrey. After accumulating a number of Wolfman or Dogman sightings and being able to compare their location, Linda realized that many reports would cluster around ancient burial and effigy mounds. These ancient mounds dotted the landscape of the Midwest. Wisconsin is home to the largest number of effigy mounds. Other types of mounds in the area include burial mounds, temple mounds, and many places that were considered sacred. Mainstream archaeologists, the guys in the white coats, feel certain that the mounds were all created by the local Indian populations. The idea has become so ingrained in history that scientists refuse to listen to the folks who should know. Many Indians say these mounds were there long before their ancestors arrived in the area. They say they don't know who built them. The large lake in the story sounds like it might have been Lake Michigan, which is a few miles northeast from Mackinac. Traverse City area also is on Lake Michigan. Both of these locations had many sacred mounds in the area. They also both have many Dogman reports. Here in Texas, there are a few Dogman sightings every year. A legend from up near Junction tells about one possible origin of these half-man, half-dogs. Some residents of the Texas Hill Country may be familiar with the story of the Beast of Bear Creek. It was widely believed among the early settlers of Kimball County that an old Native American shaman was responsible for becoming this beast. The shaman was one of the last survivors of his tribe. Vast majority of them had been killed or run off by settlers who were moving into the area. In a bid for revenge, the shaman developed the ability to change from his normal human form into that of a large wolf. This change from being a medicine man to a bloodthirsty wolf would make me think he had become a skinwalker. Medicine men and shaman use their abilities to heal the sick and help those in need. Skinwalkers turn into animals and kill. The old Indian would transform into a wolf and then set out into the countryside attacking livestock and anyone found outdoors at night. Tales of shapeshifters and skinwalkers permeated the folklore of many Indian tribes. What makes this particular story of a skinwalker unusual is that many of the white settlers of Kimball County believed this story as well. Most settlers wrote off any weird stories coming from the locals as being just superstitious nonsense. But those living in Kimball County, especially near Cleo, took these stories of a man-beast as being true. N.Q. Patterson lived in Kimball County during the time that the Beast of Bear Creek roamed the countryside. At one time, he had been a Texas Ranger, sent to Bear Creek to do something about the fighting between the settlers and the Indians. Patterson decided to stay in Kimball County. He served as the county treasurer, followed by being the county judge. Then he became a tombstone carver. It was his skill as a stonecutter and sculptor for which he is remembered today. When Patterson had some time off from working as a tombstone worker, he would walk along Bear Creek looking for usable cliff face. Once he had found the right spot, he would get busy carving an image into the limestone. Some were animals found in the area, and others were people that he knew. Of the many images created by Patterson, one in particular has become quite well known. They call it the Cleo Face, due to its proximity to the small town. The large carving depicted in stone is that of a fierce creature. The figure seems to be part human and part animal. The nose is broad and protrudes like the muzzle of a wolf rather than that of a person. The lips of the creature are curled back in a vicious snarl, revealing fangs. The carving was quite large and became very well known in the area. Many folks came to the conclusion that this was a representation of the old shaman in his wolf guise, being the beast of Bear Creek. People who saw the carving thought that maybe Patterson had seen the monster himself. No one is sure if he was merely basing his carving on legend that he had heard, or was the Cleo Face something Patterson had encountered. The Kimball County area continues to be a source of some strange creature reports. People have reported seeing Bigfoot. Then again, if you run into a huge hair-covered creature in the woods, how can you be sure if it's Bigfoot or maybe a dogman? Or maybe a werewolf? Today, Cleo, Texas is nothing but a ghost town. There are a few folks still living in the area. On many nights, they report hearing strange howls coming from the dark. This is just one of many locations I'd love to spend a week or so looking for creatures. I found some stories from people who had a run-in with dogman or maybe werewolves. How about a were-dog? I found some of these stories at dogmanencounters.com. Lots of reports and some really bizarre stories. One story from 1975 is from Manistee County, Michigan. This woman was newly married, 21-year-old, and she had a small baby. They were living in a mobile home at the time. Her teenage sister was visiting. Everyone had gone to bed sometime around 11 o'clock. As they were getting to sleep, the whole house was shaken by the sound of some horrible, loud howls coming from outside. The woman said she could feel it vibrating inside her body, and it hurt her ears. It felt as if the howl caused the entire trailer to vibrate. The sound was not human, but it had a guttural human-like sound to it, mixed in, as if it was half wolf, half human. The sound seemed to come from just outside the back door. Everybody jumped out of bed, looked at each other, asking what on earth had made that sound. Her husband ran and got his rifle. He was an avid hunter, and he knew how to shoot. The woman making the report said he looked scared, which was not common at all. Opening the back door, her husband yelled to whoever or whatever was out there to leave, or he was going to start shooting. And she begged him to stay inside and lock the door. After a look around from the doorway, her husband closed and locked the door. Nobody got any sleep that night. They all stayed up in the living room, waiting for the sun to come drive the monsters away. They spent their time trying to figure out what had made the howl. It had been way too loud to have been any animal living in the area. In the morning, there was no sign of anything in their yard. This next story comes from Oceana County, Michigan. Laura had fractured her arm in November of 2008. As she was stuck at home in Shelby, Michigan, with nothing to do and nowhere to go. The cast made it hard to drive, so she was kind of at the mercy of her friends. Her best friend lived 35 miles away, but would drive over as often as she could. Shelby is a small town with few attractions. It sits near the east bank of Lake Michigan. The pair would drive to one of the few restaurants and have dinner, or sometimes take in a movie. One night, after their weekly get-together, her friend was driving back towards her home. It was in the middle of February, and the streets were covered in snow. It was well after 11 p.m., and they were traveling on US 31, heading north right around the Rothbury area of Oceana County. Just ahead of them, heading in the same direction, was a small pickup. Suddenly, a huge dark shadow came running from the side of the road. It was human-shaped and running across the pavement. The being was coming from the left side of the road. It crossed the 2 lanes and ran right into the rear quarter panel of the truck. The impact caused the driver of the pickup to swerve violently and slam on the brakes. The pair in the car slowed down, but still came up close to the scene of the accident. The pickup driver seemed to see what had hit him. He hit the gas and sped away. The 2 girls were now close enough to get a good look at the creature that had hit the truck. They both said, "Did you see that?" at nearly the same time. They were both astonished by what they were seeing. The creature looked like a dog or a wolf running on its hind legs. It looked as if it stood 7 feet tall. The impact with the small truck didn't even seem to faze the beast. It kept going towards the right side of the highway. In a few steps, the thing was out of sight. They finished the drive to the young woman's house in silence. Neither one knew what to say. They were both lost in their own thoughts. Once they sat down and tried to reason out what they had witnessed, the creature looked like a 7-foot-tall dog or a wolf. It had pointed ears like an animal. They both said it looked like the creature had short hair and mane around its neck. All of its hair was dark. The face had a muzzle like a dog or a wolf, and its mouth was partially open, and they could see pointy teeth. As the beast ran, it swung its front legs like a man would. Everything was covered in hair. Neither one of them remembered seeing a tail. The creature was not wearing any kind of clothing, so they could see the entire body, and they could see everything had hair on it. After the discussion, they came to the conclusion that they had seen the Michigan Dogman. 8 years later, January 2016, just south of Rothbury, Michigan, remember where the 2 women had their encounter. Someone had another sighting of the Dogman. This witness was shoveling snow. I hate snow. I hate shoveling snow. I shoveled snow at Fort Knox all winter 1985. I swore I'd never shovel snow again. And so far, I haven't had to. But then it doesn't snow in Laredo very often. The witness was shoveling snow just south of Roxbury. Once he had finished his work, He took a walk to unwind and see the sights. He lived on a 270-acre farm owned by his family. He took a trail that headed out into the woods. Hundreds of trees that were part of the farm. He followed a creek that meandered through the trees. All was well until he was about 300 yards from his house. He stopped to light a cigarette, and he was looking around to see if there were any deer around. Behind a tree, he spotted an animal of some kind that was looking at him. It stared at him with a look of intelligence. As the witness watched, the animal stood up on its hind legs. Now the eyes were well above his head. The eyes were amber-colored. The creature looked at the man for a few seconds, then let go with a growl. It turned and bounded away. It traveled on two legs like a man, but it moved more like an animal. The beast was out of sight in a heartbeat. This was when the witness had noticed there was a complete lack of any animal sounds. The woods were way too still. No birds or small creatures were making any sound whatsoever. I'm going to take a brief pause here to encourage my listeners to be sure and head on over to Optica del Norte if you're having difficulty reading or seeing. It's right across the street from the Embassy Suites at 105 Calle del Norte. You should be able to see what you're looking at. If you're hungry, I encourage you to go to the 1755 barbecue at the Frontera Beer Garden on San Bernardo. He is open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 to 2 and from 6 to 11. But be careful, there are now several bright red food trailers at the Frontera, so be sure and find the one that's 1755. They have the best food. If you hear a bump in the night, you don't know who to call, contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society. They will come and give you a free diagnosis of your home. Find out if it's a ghost lurking in your closet or maybe you just have a pipe making noise. You can contact them at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. I don't have a date on this next story, but it is from Virginia, so I think my nephew might want to keep this one in mind. The witness was around 8 at the time of his sighting. The house they lived in was next to the Great Dismal Swamp. At one time, the swamp was guesstimated at well over 1 million acres, stretching from Norfolk, Virginia, to Edenton, North Carolina. Over the years, the swamp has been whittled down a bit, but it's still a huge place. If you're driving from, say, Floyd, Virginia to Virginia Beach, you'll drive right past it. Late one night, on a clear, well-lit evening, the witness was lying in bed. He was still awake and not even close to being tired. It was one of those nights when he had to go to bed whether he wanted to or not. It's funny how, now that I'm old enough, no one tells me what to do and I can stay up all night if I want. I'm in bed by 10 just about every night. The witness glanced over at the window. There, looking in at him, was a wolf, or at least the head of a wolf. The eyes were yellow and seemed to almost glow. The head was covered with red, brown, and creamy-colored hair. The beast had saliva dripping from its jaws as it stood there looking in the window. In order to look in the window, the wolf would have to have been standing on its hind legs with its neck stretched as far as it would go. As the witness lay there petrified, he noticed the wolf had human features surrounding the wolf's muzzle. Those yellow glowing eyes really got to him. Leaping from his bed, the witness ran for his parents' room. His mother thought he was just having a nightmare, but she allowed him to stay the night. The next morning, the family went outside and walked around the house, and they discovered the ground beneath each window had been churned up by something. The grass was all matted down, and there were scratch marks below the windows like some animal had been trying to hold itself up while looking in. To this day, parts of the Great Dismal Swamp have yet to be explored to any extent. Just about anything might be hiding there in the wet, overgrown area. This next story comes from El Paso back in 1968. A bunch of kids were playing baseball. It was getting late, but there were only so many hours in the summer vacation, so they wanted to get as much time in as they could. They were lacking in enough players, so they just rotated positions instead of trying to form teams. As the boy telling the story said, it was his turn up to pitch. He threw the ball over the plate, and one of his buddies hit it. The foul ball went up and over the fence in the direction of the railroad tracks. One of the players ran to the fence, about to jump over to retrieve the ball, when he noticed a man standing near where the ball had come to rest. The boy yelled to the stranger to please throw the ball back. Instead of helping out, the man simply ignored the request. This got the other ball players to gather along the fence. They all began yelling to the man, trying to get him to comply. For some unknown reason, nobody felt like jumping the fence. They were all hesitant to get near the man standing next to their ball. Something about this guy just didn't feel right. Thinking that maybe the guy was in a stupor, maybe he was a drunken bum, one of the kids threw a rock in his vicinity. Not at him, but close enough to get his attention. The rock hit the ground near the man's feet. This must have gotten the man's attention because he began to turn towards the ball players. As he turned, the man began to crouch down, coming to rest on all fours. Once he was facing the boys, he no longer looked like a man, but he looked like a wolf. He began growling and snarling at the boys. Somebody yelled, "Werewolf!" and the whole gang took off running. They headed towards their homes a few blocks from the ball field. As the boys would come to one or the others of their homes, they would leave the group and run inside, leaving the rest to continue running. Finally, there were just 3 boys still running down the street. The storyteller, his cousin, and a close friend of theirs. They made it to the house, ran inside, and slammed the door. The storyteller's mother was shocked by the boys' behavior, and she wanted to know what was going on. When they told her, she grabbed a bottle of holy water and sprinkled it around the house. The 3 boys spent the night together, but nobody got any sleep. They all huddled together, hoping the beast would not come looking for them. The next morning, they cranked up their courage and made the trek to the ballpark to see if there was any evidence of the creature they'd seen. They found their ball where it had landed the night before. There was no sign of the Wolfman. The other ball players eventually found their way to the ball field as well, all wanting to know what had happened and did they really see a werewolf? The storyteller insisted it couldn't have been a werewolf because there was no full moon yet. The idea of needing a full moon came out way back in ancient Greece. Aristotle and Hippocrates both understood how the moon affected the tides. They reasoned that since the human body contained so much water, the moon should have effects on it as well. They then reasoned that these effects would more than likely bring out the inner beast. Thus, the idea of the full moon causing a person to turn into a wolf got started in ancient Greece. In some countries, the moon doesn't have any effect at all. A person can turn into a wolf any time, day or night. Trying to decide if this person is a dog man, werewolf, or something else is not going to happen, since the story's so old and there's no written report to go on with it. 2016, Freestone County, Texas. I've been there. This witness was staying at his grandparents' house. In some places, the coyotes have gotten so abundant that folks have taken to hunting them in order to kill them or drive them away. This young man was out hunting coyotes to keep them away from his grandparents' animals. He tracked the pack onto the neighbor's field, so he jumped the fence and continued his hunt. The trail took him into a wooded area that kind of looked like a small forest. As he walked between the trees, the man was overcome by a sense of being watched. He turned his headlight on and scanned the trees around him. Didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so he continued his search of the area on foot. Finding a hunting blind that he had put together the week before, the hunter settled in to wait and watch for his quarry. He sat there until about 6:15 in the morning. That was when he spotted something in the distance. It was crouching behind a tree. The hunter brought his rifle up so he could use the scope to see what was there in the growing light. There was some kind of a hair-covered creature looking directly at him. It was half visible, standing behind the trunk of a big tree. Thinking this might just be an unusually huge coyote, he took a shot. As he watched, the creature turned and ran away. It ran on two legs. It took about 30 minutes for the young man to get up the courage to get up from his blind and walk back to the house. Later that day, he got his grandfather to walk out there with him so they could see if there was any evidence. They found the tree, and by the position of the branches that the young man could remember from the night before, they came up with a measurement that the creature had to have been 7.5 feet tall. There was another Texas sighting of something that was either Dogman or some unknown cryptid. September 2018, this witness was sitting in the front yard early in the morning. He lived on the edge of the Sam Houston National Forest near Lake Conroe. I've been there as well. Texas is so huge, it's kind of nice to hear about places I've visited. Places with unusual and unexplained things going on in them. For the past month or so, he and his wife had been hearing strange noises around their property at night. They said it sounded like something big was crashing through the trees. Their dog had vanished as they sat there watching. They said it looked like something had reached out from the trees and grabbed the dog as it was running past the edge of the woods. They ran over and looked, but there was no sign of their dog. No blood, no fur, no churned up dirt like there had been a fight. They didn't hear any sound. All they saw was their dog disappear into the woods. A few weeks later, wanting a smoke, the witness had stepped outside to the front porch. Sitting in a long chair, smoking his cigarette, he noticed how quiet it was. Any time of the day or night, the woods are never quiet, unless there's something in them. The small critters are trying to avoid. Grabbing his spotlight, the witness began sweeping his property. At the tree line, he saw something. It looked like a wolf was looking back at him. The odd thing is, the Texas wolf population is supposed to have been all but wiped out in the 70s. There are very few red wolves still around. The gray and the Mexican wolves are in other parts of the world. Seeing a wolf on his property would be amazing and a bit scary at the same time. The eyes looked to be about 4 to 4.5 feet off the ground. They glowed kind of a greenish color when the light hit them. The man stood there watching the wolf, wondering if it was the only one in the area. Then he saw what could have only been a hand grasp the side of the tree. The creature stood up. Everybody, even folks who live in the city, know that wolves don't have hands. The wolf was now standing next to the tree on 2 legs, still staring at the man. It was covered from head to foot in gray hair. The creature took a step away from the wood line. It took another. It was slowly walking towards the man, who was still on his front porch. Both fear and wonder were trying to control his body. The man ran inside to wake his wife. He told her she had to come out and see what was in their front yard. The sound of his voice and the expression on his face must have convinced her that she needed to go have a look. Thinking the wolf man, or whatever it was, would be gone before they got back outside, the man ran to the front door, his wife right behind him. They looked out the door, and there it was. A huge wolf standing just outside the woods looking at them. The man even asked his wife if she was seeing what he was, just to be sure it wasn't all in his head. She said yes, she could see a 2-legged wolf as well. After a few minutes, the wolf dropped down to its front paws, or maybe hands, turned and walked slowly back into the trees. Seeing something like this is bound to change a person. The witness doesn't feel safe in the trees at night, thinking there might be things out there that are dangerous is one thing. Knowing these things are real is another. Could this have been somebody dressed up to look like a dogman or a werewolf? Sure. It would have to have been some crazy person. In Texas, we own a lot of guns. We also mostly know how to use them. If you live in the country and you have wild animals around, you have and know how to use guns. People have reported seeing all kinds of cryptids in the Sam Houston forest. There have been quite a few people gone missing in those woods. I talked to a man who used to work for the government. He told me about a weird collection of stories where somebody had reported seeing a bright light in the sky, followed by someone making a Bigfoot sighting. Then the next day, they would discover that someone or a couple of people were missing. All of this would happen in a very short time frame. I'd love to spend a week or so in the Sam Houston forest, but I also want to come home and be able to talk about it. Now, I've stayed up in the area a few times, but so far I haven't seen anything. Dave, you might want to keep this next few reports in mind. They're both out of Louisiana. This encounter happened a few years ago, around 2012, in South Jefferson Parish. In Louisiana, they call their counties parishes, in case you didn't know. In 1682, after 2 decades of exploring and expanding the North American interior, the French took control of French Louisiana as part of their greater New World colony of New France. 1718, the city of New Orleans was founded, and 4 years later it became the capital of French Louisiana. French Louisiana soon became an important colony for France, and people from all over France's colonial empire began to flock to the area. New Orleans quickly grew to become the center of trade, commerce, and the plantation economy. Because of France's ties to the Catholic Church, all of New France was under the authority of a single Catholic diocese, which was based out of Quebec. Even though Louisiana has less religious supervision than their French and Canadian counterparts, the Roman Catholic Church still played an important role in the exploration and development of the colony. Just before the end of the 7 Years' War, France handed most of French Louisiana over to Spain, who was also heavily Roman Catholic. Spain controlled this territory until the secret Treaty of San Ildefonso was signed in 1800 between Spain and France, which gave Louisiana back to France. In 1803, Napoleon Bonaparte agreed to sell the territory of Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. With the Organic Act of 1804, the U.S. divided their new land into the territory of Orleans and the District of Louisiana. The territory of Orleans was divided into 12 counties that used the same names and practically the same boundaries as the former colonial parishes. By 1807, the territorial legislature created 19 parishes without technically abolishing the counties. At the 1811 Constitutional Convention of the state, it was decided that Louisiana should be divided into 7 judicial districts, each being made up of a group of parishes. 1812, the territory of Orleans had grown enough to achieve statehood, becoming the state of Louisiana. It was not until 1845, Louisiana Constitution, that the term parishes officially replaced counties as the official term for the state's major civil divisions. Louisiana is the only state in America whose political subdivisions are parishes and not counties. The state is divided into 64 parishes. A parish is, by definition, a small administrative district, typically having its own church and priest, which naturally grew out of Louisiana's heavy Roman Catholic influences. Of the 64 parishes in the state, 41 of them have an elected government that is called a police jury, which also goes back to the colonial times. The police jury is the executive and legislative government of the parish, and the jurors are elected by the voters, with the president serving as the chairperson. Just a little Louisiana history. The witness in this story was hunting deer or wild pig one night on a protection levee system that was built to protect the town from hurricane floodwaters. As he walked to where the levee turned off to the left, there was a canal with woods that sat about 100 yards from some houses. To the left was a natural ridge that went out into the swamps and the marshes. As he made the turn from the ridge of the oak trees, he heard a growl. Thinking this might be a coyote or a dog, he mostly tried to ignore it, but he did walk a little slower. As he was looking around for the animal, he heard brush and small trees shaking, followed by another growl. He aimed his light in the direction of the sound and saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at him. They were amber in color. As he watched the eyes in the glow of his flashlight, the man realized the ground had dropped away in front of where his eyes were located. The owner of those eyes had to be huge. The hunter slowly began walking back while keeping an eye on the creature. He kept the light on it so the thing couldn't sneak up on him. As he moved, the thing became easier to see. The brush thinned out so he could now see the body, which was kind of human-looking, covered in black and brown hair. The creature had pointy ears, a muzzle like a dog or a wolf, and it was standing on two legs. Instead of paws, the thing had hands that were covered with hair as well. It was time to panic. He aimed in on the creature, hoping the sight of the rifle would convince this nightmare it was time to leave. Instead of slinking away, the beast began walking towards him. Things were going from bad to horrible. Figuring it was time to act, the hunter fired one shot directly into the man-beast. The impact caused the thing to take a step back. Instead of dropping or running away, the thing let out with a blood-curdling growl. The hunter used that moment to turn and run for his pickup. As he ran, he kept looking back to see where the monster was. It was following him, but it was not gaining. Making it to a well-lit parking lot at the local library, the hunter was able to get his truck open and jump in. Once in the relative safety of his truck, the hunter was able to start the engine and drive out of there. The beast stayed out of the light, standing in the gloom at the very edge of the lot, watching him as he sped away. After the encounter, the questions began to form. What had he run into? Could this have been the legendary rougarou? A rougarou is Cajun or Arcadian variation of the original French word loup-garou. One source of information was the hunter's grandfather. Not wanting to admit he'd been poaching, the hunter said that this had happened to a friend of his. Well, his grandfather said that when he was 17, he'd had a similar run-in in the same area. His grandfather never saw what was following him, but he said it followed him all the way back to his house. This next Louisiana story comes from central part of the state, and it happened in 1987. The witness was 14 years old at the time. His mother was interested in the paranormal. She would buy copies of UFO magazine and watch any TV shows dealing with UFO, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or anything considered fringe by some. The witness grew up being interested in some of these things, believing they were real but never having any actual evidence. They lived in a mobile home park, which was just off Highway 28 East. It was a 2-lane roadway. It was a long street that ran into a dead end. At the very end, where there was a turnaround, and there was the only brick house in the area. The rest were all trailers. Near the brick house were some thin woods with several trails going off in every direction. There was a deep ditch to the right-hand side where people had been dumping junk and trash for years. Things like old washing machines and broken laundry baskets and anything that was beyond repair or use. The kids in the neighborhood had what they called a clubhouse, where they would all gather to hang out. Some of the kids had hauled broken furniture into the area and set it up in a circle like it was somebody's living room. There were no trees or anything. There were nothing but trees around. There was no actual structure, but they still called it their clubhouse. The witness was at the club, placing a few new acquisitions in the area. Near the ditch was a metal folding table that somebody had thrown away. The table was sitting up against a huge oak that had fallen over next to the creek. Well, the witness was trying to figure out how to get the table through a fence that was in bad shape. He was about to duck under the fence when he heard a snuffling sound. The sound drew his attention to the opposite side of the stream. Standing on the other side of the stream was a 7 to 8 foot tall creature, and it was sniffing the air as if trying to find something. Its head was turned slightly. The first thought that entered the boy's mind was, "Oh my God, werewolves are real." It had a wolf-like head, tall, pointy ears. The eyes glowed red. It had a snout for its face. It stood on 2 muscular legs, which ended in enormous paws. There was no tail as far as he could see. It had a massive chest as well as extremely muscular arms and hands. The hands seemed to have the same kind of pads that the paws, the feet, but they were arranged a little differently. It kept sniffing the air as it stepped over the tree trunk like it was nothing. The tree was big enough an average person would have had to physically climb it to get over. The boy was convinced this beast was looking for him. It stopped and seemed to be breathing or panting, but there was this deep rumbling that accompanied each breath. Hoping to escape before the monster spotted him, the boy slowly began to sneak away. Once he thought he was far enough, the boy jumped to his feet and ran to the road. Grabbing his bike, he pedaled away as fast as he could go. When he got home, the boy wondered what he'd just encountered. Was it dangerous? It sure looked like it could have killed him and eaten him. After the family moved from Louisiana to Mississippi, the boy was introduced to Dogman stories. This was what he had seen at the end of the road that day. As you might have noticed, I used the name Dogman and werewolf kind of interchangeably. What would be the difference? A dog is nearly a wolf. If you run into one, you'd be hard-pressed to decide which it was. There have been a lot of Bigfoot sightings where the description could be interpreted as being a dogman, like Joe on Highway 59. There are some who believe the dogman is a distinct group of creatures that live in out-of-the-way locations. People run into them only when they stray into their territory. Then there are folks that think these creatures are humans that can transform into monsters. Werewolves or weredogs. Some shapeshifters that hunt down anything for food or fun. Magical beings with superhuman strength. Things like skinwalkers from Indian tradition. Maybe these things live in another dimension. For unknown reasons, these man-beasts cross over from their world into ours. Somebody has an encounter with a dog-man, and then it just slips away back into its own world. Until we get an interview with a dog-man or werewolf, we might never know. It does make life interesting. Next time you're out walking in the woods or driving along some heavily wooded road, keep your eyes open. Maybe you'll see a dogman. If you do, let me know. We can always use more dogman reports. If you really love dogman stories, I suggest you check out Dark Waters for his podcast. You can find him on YouTube. He lives in Louisiana and he has some real interesting stories. And he also has a very interesting and hypnotic voice. Listening to him is almost like listening to Lyle Fanthorpe telling a story. If you'd like to read some Dogman stories, check out lindagodfrey.com. LINDGODFREY. She's been on the show a few times. You can find her at Linda Godfrey Strange Things on YouTube. She's written several books on the subject. Very interesting. In fact, I think she was the first one to talk about the Dogman sightings in her book, The Beast of Bray Road. She's also written a fictional story that is well worth reading. The book is called God Johnson. It's funny, entertaining, interesting, and very well written. You can find it at YouTube if you'd like. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends know what they've been missing. Tell them to check me out. Maybe they'll enjoy it too. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?